Vamos a comenzar. Esta sesión va a transcurrir enteramente en inglés. Es una sesión internacional, yo prefiero casi llamarle global, y por eso va a transcurrir en inglés. Hemos incluido subtítulos en inglés en buena parte, y hay otra parte donde habrá pantallas que pueden facilitar la comprensión. So, welcome to this session of the conference week of Pro Workspaces. Every day our world, our business, our societies are more global and are more interconnected. This pandemic is a perfect example of it. Something that started in a concrete area of the world in a few weeks has dramatically affected to the whole world. The technology has made our world smaller every day, and today we are going to test it. So in the session of today we will focus in the global vision. We want to know how the flexible office industry has been affected globally for the COVID-19. We will have two clearly different parts. In the first part, we will know testimonials. We have made the same three simple questions to different experts and operators of different countries and different areas of the world. They have recorded their answers, and we only added captions. Be sure that the different impacts, the different approaches of the situation and the different visions will be very, very interesting and it's a very helpful information for all of us. In the second part, we will have in live an analysis of James Rankin of Instant Offices about the demands and about the changes in the last month. And after that, you can ask him whatever you want. The questions can be made written if you are connected to this session through the microsite proworkspaces.nstream.is. Anyway, all this event online of the conference week of Pro Workspaces, it would not be possible without the participation of our sponsors. Today, the sponsor of this global session is Nexudus. So, please, Carmen, can you introduce in a few seconds Nexudus? Thank you.
Nexudus es la plataforma líder de gestión de espacios de coworking y trabajo flexible. Desde 2012 hemos ayudado a miles de espacios a automatizar sus operaciones, reduciendo así recursos de gestión, lo que permite que vosotros los operadores dediquéis vuestro tiempo a vuestra comunidad. La tecnología es el pilar fundamental en el que apoyarnos en estos tiempos, con dos soportes básicos, el análisis de datos y la conectividad. Nuestra prioridad es ofrecer fluidez y seguridad a vuestros miembros gracias a mejoras tecnológicas y aplicaciones, convirtiendo así vuestro espacio en un lugar de trabajo seguro y libre de contacto.
Okay, thank you again, Nexudus, for your participation in the session. Let's start with the first part, the testimonials. For this part, we have a very impressive group of experts and operators all around the world. I want to thank you, all of them, their availability and the effort they have made to participate in this session. We have Frank Hotel, that is chairman and founder of Alliance Virtual Offices, is also founder and chairman of the Alliance Business Center Network. He's involved in a lot of companies, many of them around the flexible office industry, as All Workspace, that is an online publication of the future of work. We have Lars Henkel. Lars is co-owner of Contora Office Solutions with locations in Berlin, Düsseldorf, Frankfurt, Hamburg and Munich, He's president of the German Association of Flex Office too. Sergio Carpentieri, he's the CEO of Executive Service. Executive Service started in 1972 with spaces in Rome and Milano. He's the second generation in flexible office. We have Jenny Foley. Jenny Foley started in the flexible office industry in 1987. In her actual company called Workspaces, they have 10 locations around Australia and Philippines. Emma Swinnerton is international partner, EMEA head of flexible workspace at Cushman & Wakefield. Paula Almanza. Paula is co-founder and CEO of Loom with several locations in Madrid and Barcelona. Krista Juk is managing director and co-owner of Office Center Group, and Con Basler, that is co-owner at Office Center too. They have in a few days 9 spaces in Belgium, all around Belgium, and Con is a member of the board of the Belgian Workspace Association. And we have Diego Vélez, that is co-CEO and co-founder of Tinco. Tinco have spaces in Colombia, in Bogota and Medellin, and he's involved too in the new Colombian Workspace or Co-working Association. So let's start.
At Alliance, we have a network of business center, co-working, and virtual office partners all over the world. So we have a pretty good bird's eye view of how the situation is impacting our industry globally. And despite global lockdowns and stay-at-home orders, the industry at large is actually doing well. Businesses of all size are seeking greater flexibility, lower costs, and reduced risk in their workplace strategies. And that has a positive impact on our industry. However, we are seeing an interesting, strong shift in location selection, moving from the central city to more suburban locations as people prefer not to commute via public transport. These suburban locations are generally more affordable than central business districts and also offer a much shorter commute, enabling staff and people to work near their home as well as from their home. Virtual officing is booming, actually, in all markets. People that are starting new enterprises as a result of changes in employment. It's also a route for large companies to bring their employees into a more professional environment while still managing a remote work format. In response to physical distancing, traditional business centers with more private offices than open workstations are doing better than open space centers, which have relied mostly on short-term membership plans that have catered to drop-in daily users. We expect to see significant growth in 2021 and 2022, regardless of economic conditions, for all flexible workspaces and virtual office providers. Work from home only works for so long. In its place, companies are seeking a more flexible and robust hybrid strategy, and growth in virtual and flexible officing will be powered by larger companies allowing a work near home program for a large percentage of their workforce.
Our Federal Association of Business Centers represents members from Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. Our active members are all from Germany, so I will focus my answers on Germany. In spring, there was a lot of fear and uncertainty. Co-working areas in Germany were empty by the next day. In the most important daily news program, empty co-working spaces were shown. The classic business centers, locations with little or no space in open space design, and small or medium-sized offices, initially had a drop in sales of around 10 to 15%. The conference areas remained empty and sales were completely absent. Over the summer, up to September, the conference part has recovered to some degree, and we had regular and noticeable bookings again. Providers with virtual office services reported an increase in this area compared to 2019. However, many office spaces are now confronted with vacancies of between 20 to 50%. Reletting this space is currently the biggest challenge, especially against the background of vacant spaces in buildings that until recently were rented by Regus, WeWork or large companies who are returning large areas to the landlords. The price expectations of customers is lowered down to 30 to 50% of the normal level. As long as there's still a reluctance among decision makers, nothing significant will change here. Well-managed providers will be able to survive this phase with falling profits and rising losses. Providers with a large market power will reach agreements with the landlords and reduce the amount of space they occupy. Some providers, especially in low-cost locations, will have difficulties and the market will clean up a little. In the long term, this offers a variety of opportunities for the remaining providers.
Okay, hi everybody, my name is Sergio Carpentieri. I run business center since, my family runs business center since 1972 in Italy. We run actually Rome and Milan offices with 3,000 square meter spaces in these cities. And we've never seen such a mess situation like in this COVID-19 moment. Our industry has been affected a lot from this coronavirus, and most of our clients, big companies and multinational companies, left the spaces for smart working from 10th of March when we had the first lockdown, and actually now it's end of October. We still haven't seen anyone coming back. From the normal people we have here, which is about 200 people working in our spaces, we have about 10 people working now in our spaces. And so what I have to say is that this COVID-19 has affected a lot our situation and our industry. We lost about 50% of our contracts, and the other 50 is still here in smart working. So we hope that this situation will recover very soon, but now in these moments we are going into a new lockdown, so I don't see very bright moments for our company and our business center here in Rome and in Milan. Hope to have good news from New Year, let's say mid-New Year. We hope next spring the situation will become better. That's it.
Since 1985, when I started my business in Australia, in what was known as serviced offices and now known as flexible office shared offices. There were very few operators in the market. Servcorp was the largest player, and the business I ran, which was called CEO then, was the largest privately owned operator. We had a network of offices all around Australia in all the major cities. Today, many of the large international players have entered the market in Australia, such as Regus and WeWork, and many operators from Asia, all of them with large joint venture capital money behind them, primarily from China, Hong Kong, and Singapore. It is a very strong market in Australia, with more people knowing about the product in the market due to the media publicity that from WeWork and Regis. So there is strong demand. When Australia went into lockdown, all the major operators immediately closed their doors, such as WeWork and Regis, and they stood down their staff. As a small operator at Workspaces, we kept our doors open, providing our clients with the much needed essential services such as virtual offices, mail services, and so on, and also keeping in touch with our clients to see that they were okay. For me, the pandemic affected me personally, as I've not been able to travel between our centres. We have centres in all the major cities of Australia, in Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney, and in the Gold Coast, but also in the Philippines. So I've not been able to visit these centres and visit the locations and visit the staff, although there have been many Zoom calls between us. But it's nothing like personally being able to go to the centres and visit some of your clients and see if everyone's okay. Other than that, we haven't been affected financially, and personally, our business centres have not been affected. As our target market has always been corporate market, it's always been a corporate market, established businesses seeking private offices. I've always looked at that market. I've never really ventured into co-working. The established market, these clients are usually unaffected by a global economy or a pandemic. So although we are in lockdown and these clients are not able to attend their offices, they've still continued to pay us. So we have been very lucky. Inquiry has still been coming in strong by people looking to downsize from commercial space. So being with very few operators with our doors open, we've been able to take advantage of this. Currently, most of our locations are completely occupied. We are experiencing strong demand for what we provide, and we have little or no vacancy. We are also expanding in this market due to the strong demand, specifically for private offices. Co-working has been literally non-existent.
At Cushman & Wakefield, we provide advice to clients covering the whole of EMEA, but as I'm based in the UK, I will talk specifically about the UK market. Pre-pandemic, flexible workspace was on a positive growth trajectory, with London being the most mature city globally for flexible workspace, with flexible workspace as a percentage of total stock at around 6% of the market. There had, however, been a few bumps in the road, notably with the WeWork IPO at the end of 2019. That was, however, nothing compared to what happened at the start of the pandemic, which has been the most challenging few months for the sector. Most operators have kept buildings open, albeit with skeleton staff, but they've all struggled from a result of clients not using the space, looking to cancel agreements or negotiate price reductions. And that's led to occupancy dropping from an average of around 10 to 30%. And as a result, many operators have had to seek concessions from their landlords and owners of their buildings.
So we have different types of users, and what we have experienced is that the smaller teams or individuals are more sensitive to the economic consequences of COVID. So they were the first ones that we saw leaving. But given that they are really flexible, they are also the first ones that are coming back. So that trend that started like that, it's now peaking. On the other hand, we also have large teams of more than 20 people, even teams of 50 or 100 people. And they tend to be more stable because it's more difficult to move a large team from place to place. So those teams stayed with us during the COVID.
Dear Spanish friends, many greetings from your Belgian colleagues. And first of all, I want to explain how the Belgian service office market is evolving. I refer to our graph, which we have made since 1990 with the number of business centers in Belgium, which has not increased until 2005, 2006, where we have seen the first increase in number of centers, which was about 5% per year. And from 2014-15 on, mainly due to the increase of co-working centers. The business center market has grown with more than 15% a year the last 5 years. As a result of the crisis, of the COVID crisis this year, we see now that this growth has stopped and that in 2020 there will be as much centers which will have closed than centers that will have opened.
La industria de flex office ha venido creciendo vertiginosamente en los últimos 5 años en Colombia. La mayoría de las empresas de todos los tamaños y de diferentes sectores se han dado cuenta que han encontrado beneficios, no solamente en el costo y en la flexibilidad, sino en la maravillosa co-creación que puede encontrarse en estos sitios. En los últimos años hemos visto que cada vez más la gran industria multinacional, las grandes empresas de nuestro país encuentran fortalezas al buscar el coworking como su aliado. En Tinco tenemos operaciones, más o menos unos 11.200 metros y 3.000 en proceso en Medellín y Bogotá, y con este concepto nuestro hemos dado la posibilidad de que diferentes industrias se integren. Ahora con el COVID, a pesar de la penetración que tenemos en el mercado, hemos encontrado una reducción general y lentamente, con la apertura económica que ha vuelto a tener nuestro país, empezamos a encontrar otra vez las empresas volviendo y cada vez más empresas más grandes encontrando ventajas con el flex office.
In our industry, COVID-19 has accelerated a number of trends that were already happening. For instance, for some time now, we've been fulfilling virtual office requirements for large corporations and government who are seeking a more distributed, flexible, and low-risk workplace strategy while still maintaining access to professional workspaces and services. We're also seeing a strong increase in startups from individuals that have recently been laid off due to the pandemic and are looking to their first step on a commercial real estate ladder. On the flip side, many traditional office clients are downsizing to a virtual office or a smaller flexible office in order to conserve capital and maintain a business address location while working remotely. Interestingly, we're seeing a resurgence in demand for live reception services, which we believe is due to companies switching to a remote work setting, and in particular, those working from home needing a professional front of house assistance. Digital mail, Zoom rooms, podcast studios have also all emerged as high demand products and services during the COVID era, and we expect that to continue.
We asked our members about the changes during the COVID-19 era in a survey a few weeks ago. 2/3 of the operators of business centers in Germany are convinced that the trend towards the home office will continue in the long term after the COVID-19 pandemic, and that companies will permanently reduce their conventional office space. The trend towards flexible office solutions has become increasingly grown in recent years. With the need to combat the pandemic, the development has accelerated enormously. The business center industry also expects this trend to result in a sustained positive development for its own locations. Many jobs will continue to require a face-to-face approach from time to time in the future. If companies permanently reduce office and conference space for economic reasons, they will need temporary space that we can offer them. There will be more office spaces which will be used by teams up to 4 to 8 people, completely flexible in terms of time. And for the overhangs and team meetings, existing conference rooms and day office will be used.
Most of our clients are multinational companies, and of course, because of this COVID situation, we lost more than 50% of these companies because they are smart working, or they left the operation in our cities. and we're seeing some more small businesses, local small businesses, coming to get informations and applying for our services. But of course, the big problem is the budget they have is very few respect of the big companies we used to have. So we have problems of revenues that are falling down for about 30-40%, which is a big loss of money for our company. And we hope that in the next months the big companies will come back to our cities, and Rome and Milan, as I said before. Otherwise, the situation will be very hard to be faced.
As we've always targeted a corporate market, this remains very, very strong. We definitely find that all the inquiry coming in today is for private offices, with inquiry for co-working totally non-existent. No one is looking to co-work in this climate or share an office, everyone preferring to keep safe. It's mandatory here in Australia to wear masks, especially in Melbourne where I'm from, and to social distance and to be safe. Our clients tend to be a mixture of lawyers, barristers, judges, accountants, financial planners, business consultants, construction companies, mining companies, developers, real estate, IT companies, software developers, health practitioners such as psychologists, psychiatrists. We even have cardiologists, migration agents, retired CEOs, and so on. Virtual offices are also in strong demand in all our locations, as most people are moving to work from home. They still need that professional front for professional telephone answering, where you can answer the phones and put it and take a message, email it to them, or forward the call to them. They also need an address where they can receive their mail, so we can either forward this mail or scan and email this to them. This, of course, is obviously a preference to co-working in your centre. Meeting room and boardroom bookings have been non-existent in this climate, and people are accepting Zoom meetings from a home or private office. Boardrooms and meeting room bookings have been literally non-existent.
At Cushman & Wakefield, we offer advice to clients around anything to do with flexible workspace. And we also have our own flexible workspace delivery platform, Indigo, which enables us to offer a fully outsourced flexible workspace solution. We've been busy throughout the pandemic, as although the sector as a whole has struggled, it's meant that more people have needed our advice. In addition, where businesses have unfortunately not been able to survive the difficult few months, landlords have come to us to explore whether we can support them in terms of the ongoing operation of those spaces. Going forwards, we see there's a significant opportunity in an area we would term managed space, which is where clients are looking for their own space with their own front door, but to take that space on more flexible terms and potentially fitted and with other services wrapped around that. We therefore are expanding our Indigo delivery platform to offer that service specifically to both occupier and landlord clients. And we see that this is going to be a significant growth area going forwards.
Since COVID, we have broadened the spectrum of potential users that we have. We obviously continue having the traditional users we had. So innovators, entrepreneurs, SMEs, corporations, everything. But on top of that, we have added some digital nomads, people who decide to work remotely, but they may not necessarily want to work from home. So they look for spaces that they can use for 2 or 3 hours on a daily basis or a few hours a week. And we also see, surprisingly, large corporations who are looking for other headquarters that are not the classic that they used to have. So what's happened is that the spectrum that we have of users has broadened a lot. At Loom, we normally use a co-creation methodology to create our product. So what we did is sit down with a different spectrum of users and ask them what they needed now that everything has changed. And as a consequence, what we created were different products for the different groups of potential users. So we have something called Loom Go, which caters at people who are digital nomads, together with another one, which is Loom Liquid Headquarters, so that if you just need a virtual office to have some place of reference, you can have that. We also have Loom Meetings, so that you can buy different hours in some of the different locations to use as meet space or headquarters as well. We have Loom as a service for corporations. This is the equivalent of headquarters as a service. So basically you choose a space and we tailor make it for the user. And it can include 100 or 200 desks, for example. So we go from paying per hour to paying a whole headquarters.
Good afternoon. My name is Krista Juk. I'm the CEO of Office Center. We have 9 locations in Belgium, a total of 33,000 square meters, business centers and co-working space. Our type of client is a very diversified customer portfolio, from local small SMEs to governmental organizations and even multinationals. Since the COVID crisis, we see a big growth in demand, mostly from larger corporations who actually have now a fixed rental contract, and they need flexibility because they now have landlords who are not giving any flexibility, and nobody knows what the future will bring. So every corporation, big or small, need flexibility, and that's what we can offer as a business center.
En Tinco tenemos diferentes servicios en el mismo espacio de Flex Office. Tenemos oficinas privadas, tenemos espacios abiertos, en oficinas Open Office, tenemos hot desks, que lo denominamos Flex, tenemos también salas de reuniones y tenemos todo un paquete de servicios virtuales. Realmente tenemos clientes para todos los servicios, de diferentes tipos de industrias y, por supuesto, nuestros empresarios que están siempre acompañándonos y a quienes alentamos. Pero ahora con el COVID hemos notado unos cambios que han sido necesarios siguiendo los protocolos de bioseguridad requeridos por el gobierno y exigidos por Tinco. Precisamente nuestros clientes han buscado tener la separación necesaria para evitar riesgos. Las oficinas privadas han sido cada vez más apetecidas y hemos desarrollado además servicios adicionales como es Tinco en Casa, donde llevamos todos los servicios nuestros hasta la casa para generarle los beneficios que pueden tener en las instalaciones nuestras hacia las empresas con el personal que estamos atendiendo. Ese mix yo creo que es el que va a prevalecer de ahora en adelante y realmente esperamos que empecemos a dar cada vez más un match perfecto con la necesidad del mercado de acuerdo a las condiciones de reintegración económica.
Next 1 to 3 year business cycle, we expect to see increased demand for all varieties of flexible workplace solutions. There will be a big swing to more technologically based products such as digital mail, holographic meeting capability, Zoom rooms, multiple mobile lines tied to live reception, virtual reality officing. We believe all of these technologies will come to the market by 2023 and be mainstream by 2025. Not only that, but flexible workspace centers will also provide or sell these solutions as software rather than as a space solution in order to provide more connectivity across their business communities and other expanded communities overall. We also expect a global data solution to emerge that will provide industry transparency similar to what we have in the travel industry. So within a few years, this solution will enable people to book workspace and meeting rooms with all the necessary add-ons as quickly and easily as they reserve hotel rooms and flights. Again, Similar to the travel industry, we expect to see a global system for ranking and rating center quality and services. This will help clients make purchasing decisions. It will be similar to a star rating for hotels and will enable operators to strive to specific standards in order to attract a particular marketplace of clients and price their services accordingly. This will also serve to upgrade the industry's overall attention to service.
We see good opportunities for flexible providers with outstanding services, flexible and modern technology in the best locations. City centers and traffic junctions have advantages here compared to low-cost commercial areas. Providers who sell solely at low price have to face new competition here. Today, the competitors are called Regus, WeWork and the Office Group. Tomorrow, the competitors are called here are real estate funds and landlords. They will take vacant spaces into self-marketing, and they try their own flexible concepts on a large scale. Every couple of years, the way of working changes so fundamentally. But the beautiful new world of workspaces does work permanently only for a subset of all office users. The introduction of open plan offices, modern open spaces, co-working centers, and now the home office trend. There's always a lot of media hype. In the course of time, employees demand minimum open space and noise protection. Lawyers still miss walls in co-working centers. And parents demand the separation of family environment and working environment, at least from time to time. A permanent home office will only be able to exist for a fraction of the users. I cannot predict what this new reality will look like. I only know that it will be even more flexible than the past already was. We are not afraid of the future. We are looking forward to the future.
So, in the near future, we expect some small businesses to come to our centers, and what we are thinking of a new evolution of our services, it may be the co-working services, where we can put different companies sharing spaces and sharing the costs of our structure and business centers. Otherwise, if we want to, if we expect the multinationals to come back, I don't think before 12 or 24 months they will come back again to our cities. So what we will do is share spaces for more companies, more small businesses, more professionals, and hope that this will help us to survive for the next year or 2 years. I think so. So we think that co-working could be a good alternative to our business center services. So what we're also thinking is that could be a good alternative to the long-term rental that we used to have before, is to have a service on a small basis, on a short-term basis, which allows also the companies to use our services for a very short period of time. That could be also a few hours. We're talking about some pay-per-use services, pay-per-use offices. But of course, the difference between the long term and the short term is that we need many more clients to fulfill our budget and our needs of revenues for the next year. In this moment, companies don't want to have a long-term agreement, but only very short-term agreements. So we will change our way of working and way of thinking this business in a very short term, and hoping that will help us to survive for the next months and year, and to this coronavirus, which is has very affected our business.
I see the future for our industry as being very strong and in demand as more and more companies seek to work from what we offer, which is flexible office space, where we take care of all the details of reception facilities and all the facilities we provide. Well, these companies just have to focus on their business, working from their private space or their private office. Most companies, I foresee, will seek to close down their large floors in their large buildings, in their commercial offices, to work from flexible space to cut down their risk and to cut down their costs. I see more people seeking to work from private offices rather than from a co-working space. I think, especially in the next few years, I think people are more sensitive to getting the virus or to infecting others. So I see the co-worker in the next couple of years probably working from home because it is more cost effective for them, and it's become more acceptable to work from home. They probably may want to touch base and come and sit in your business lounge to network, but in Australia, it's literally the co-working market just completely died. It may not last. However, in the next few years, I think people will be very sensitive about co-working and being close to each other. In Australia, it's mandatory that you have to sit 1.5 meters apart from the next person. You've got to wear a mask. You can't sit too close. So, people are still very sensitive to all of this. I also see as people close down their commercial floors and seek alternative office accommodation or encourage their staff to work from home. More and more landlords, as their buildings become vacant, are going to come knocking on our doors looking for a good, strong operator. We've had a couple of landlords, quite a few actually, in Sydney, in Melbourne, in Brisbane, approach us about managing their space and converting this into shared flexible office accommodation. I'm sure they've approached WeWork and Regis, but I see in Australia their preference really is more to find a good local operator, a boutique operator, rather than take on an international player. So that's a risk for me. It's a risk-free market to enter into because we just get a management fee with all expenses paid. So I definitely see our market becoming very strong and acceptable as people change how they work in the future. What's also been very popular for us is these work hubs. We've created a couple of work hubs in Melbourne and in Queensland, and these are just work hubs in residential areas where people live, so they don't have far to travel to go to these work hubs to work from. They have private offices. It's in a garden setting, so it's environmentally friendly, it's sustainable, it's in green space, it's the meeting hubs are in a garden setting, so it's safe to engage with other people, to have a meeting. The offices have windows you can open up and have fresh air, so it's a very, very safe environment. So we opened these little hubs in the residential area right in March this year, which was right when COVID hit our shores, and from March to date, all our offices have been taken. We've got no vacancy. I actually see this model working as most companies want their staff to work from home. They're finding it difficult to work from home or getting tired from working from home, so therefore they can come and work in a private office close to home. We also find a lot of parents hiring these offices, private offices, so for their senior, for their children who are in senior school to come to quiet space to study in, so away from television and noise from at home. So look, we found these hubs very, very popular, and I think that's going to be more attractive instead of having all the shared offices in the city. I think the suburban locations are going to become very, very popular. That's how I see the future going.
Having looked at the performance of flexible workspace historically after previous economic downturns, we know that although the sector is often hit first, it also is the first to recover going forward. So in the medium term, when we can see our way out of the pandemic, we expect there to be increasing demand from occupiers for flexible workspace, particularly as uncertainty tends to drive increased need for flexibility. In the longer term, we firmly believe that the fundamentals of the sector are strong. And indeed, at Cushman & Wakefield, our workplace strategy team talk about the future of the office as being a workplace ecosystem where we will work, instead of just coming to the office every day, we will have a network of locations to be able to work from, which includes the home, our major office, but also a network of third-party locations, which could be located closer to our homes or to major transport links. There's a clear opportunity for flex to fill that gap. However, at the moment, there are some challenges as flexible workspace centres are primarily located in city centres and not in the locations that we've described. So there's also the opportunity to think creatively and look at repurposing other locations, with retail being a prime example, to fill that need.
Without having a crystal ball, what I would say is that we expect the whole sector to change a lot and shift towards flexibility. If there's anything good to say about what has happened recently, is that a lot of corporations who didn't believe they were ready to walk through the digital transformation path, they have realized that they had to do it. And the consequence of that is that they are ready to demand more flexibility. They have realized the importance of retaining talent and taking care of their employees. And that connects really well with co-working, because we not only provide flexible space, which is obviously very relevant for the current times, but we also take care of people, and we're really people-centered. So that helps corporations, and they can still stay with the headquarters, but start mingling and shifting towards other more flexible models.
The COVID crisis, has impacted our market very strongly, but as we see it now, it is clear that our market has a bright future ahead of us. We expect that the market of business centers, which is now approximately 3% of the total office market in Belgium, will grow to 15 to 25% by 2030, which means a multiplication factor of 4 to 5. It is clear that this will give us a lot of opportunities, but the main question will be how we will challenge this, knowing that a lot of actual operators have a very difficult 2020 and will not have the means to invest in the future of this market. So I think in our market we will see a lot of newcomers and new companies investing in the future of our market, which will mean a lot of new competitors.
Que va a evolucionar el mercado nuestro a mediano y largo plazo. Realmente hay varias incógnitas a resolver, pero hemos visto en este corto plazo, cuando empezamos a ver nuevamente la luz después de esta pandemia, saliendo de ella, encontramos que cada vez más la gran industria, las empresas que tienen muchos puestos de trabajo, han encontrado en el Flex Space un aliado fundamental para poder dar pasos de crecimiento. Las empresas no quieren invertir en adecuaciones, no saben proyectar cuántos metros cuadrados ni puestos de trabajo pueden tener, y ante eso necesitan un partner de desarrollo que pueda brindarles las garantías para poder seguir el desarrollo de su misión y su visión. En Tinco confiamos plenamente en eso, no solo con los servicios que había explicado antes, sino también con el desarrollo de desarrollos adicionales hacia la gran industria, donde hoy alojamos compañías de 200, 300, 400 personas si se requieren, y les damos la oportunidad de crecer o de crecer con un estilo acordeón para que puedan tomar decisiones más rápidas en el camino. Creemos que vamos a tener una penetración en esta industria del flex space cada vez mayor sobre los arrendamientos tradicionales de oficinas y sobre todo con el mayor valor agregado que podemos ofrecer.
Good afternoon, this is Maria Sastre, CEO at Nomad Espacios in Spain. I am delighted to introduce you to James Rankin, Head of Research and Insight at the Instance Group of UK. Now, James, please tell us about the impact of COVID on global demand and countries that have recovered the quickest, and how changing demands from the occupier, what is important to them now, and where they will be looking for a space in the future.
So thank you for joining. I'm going to give a summary over the next 10 minutes of what we as the Instant Group see and happened over the last 6 to 9 months across Europe. It's certainly been a tough market, and the title of my sort of short presentation, Wow, What a Year, I think sums up nicely what we've seen, not necessarily in a positive way. That being said, we as a company have managed to still put around 17,500 people into flexible workspace so far this year, and have luckily seen sort of demand over the last quarter at least pick up substantially since the start of the crisis. I'm based in the UK, but we have a member of my team, Pablo, who's based in Madrid, also on the call, and he can answer any questions. So the market has been really tough, there's no doubt about it, but there have been a number of positives that have come out. We're starting to see some of the larger companies, and it was interesting watching the videos that have just gone on, talking about some of the activity they've started to see from large companies. I think this week we saw EY, Ernst & Young, announce that they've moved all of their office facilities to IWG in Norway, a wholesale move towards flexible space, something that I think we'll see more of going forward. So there's no doubt that the flexible workspace industry took a really hard hit during the early stages of COVID-19, with co-working space, as mentioned, I think in some of the previous videos, particularly hard hit. Open plan spaces, the short or rolling contracts, all meant for traditional small co-working providers, I think initially felt the hit the hardest, although the flexibility that they're built on and the customer focused mindset has allowed them to respond in some markets in a strong way. Across most countries globally, the demand for flexible workspace saw declines of up to 70%, even before lockdowns came into effect. So we saw that drop off before kind of the real restrictions came in. And I think this shows from our perspective that rather than COVID-19 being the causing factor, it was actually the uncertainty that was built around it and the concern that caused a lot of this effect. And I think that's something we should bear in mind even as sort of vaccines appear on the horizon. To support this thought process, we actually saw demand for flexible workspace start to creep up in most markets that did not go into total lockdowns. UAE, Singapore are examples of those which kind of completely stopped all sort of business. And I think while these restrictions or such small restrictions, lighter restrictions were in place, we did see that interest level pick up quite quickly. And you can see that by the graph on the right hand side. Today, after a tough kind of 6 or 9 months, most markets are seeing interest levels now higher than they were pre-COVID. I think certainly a very positive sign, but not an end to the challenges we face. Spain itself looks to have had a tougher time than many other EU markets. Italy is another challenging market, with interest levels in both those sort of markets actually more closely lined or mirroring sort of what we're seeing in somewhere like Australia, which has seen in certain cities really severe lockdowns for over 4 months. Although as they've come out the other side, and in example Melbourne released earlier this month, huge amounts of pent-up demand really driving that forward. So while it's not all well and rosy at the moment, there are signs of positivity on the horizon. I mentioned interest, and that's what the graph represents. Unfortunately, it's kind of one of the key trends that we've seen coming out the crisis is a longer decision-making process. So this means that while interest is up, inquiries are still down around 34% across Europe, and transactions or deals, as you might call them, are even further behind that. So sales cycles that used to last sort of 2 to 3 months are now taking sort of 5 to 6 months, with continued uncertainty and mixed information, making it really difficult. It was interesting on the call that on the videos, a couple of the people mentioned that the occupancy rates and how they've changed. It has really varied market by market. In the UK, as an example, we've seen on average occupancy rates drop by 10%. During the crisis, although we expect it to get worse before it gets better. In Germany and France, it's slightly worse, around 15%, although in markets such in Southern Europe, Spain, Portugal, and Italy, they've dropped upwards of 40% from contracted sort of occupancy rates. So what's been happening across Europe? Firstly, if we look at rates, which I think is a pretty good indicator of market performance, within the majority of the major cities, it's unsurprising to see most sort of cities seeing declines. Barcelona, as an example, looks to have seen an average rates decrease of sort of 17% so far this year, with Madrid only faring slightly better. This means from an occupier's perspective, and certainly the ones that we're speaking to, they see it as a buyer's market. And the majority of new occupiers seem to be wanting to take this as an advantage, coming in and expecting extremely competitive and often unrealistic rates, which makes it very challenging. That being said, new supply, a traditional kind of constant within the industry, both from large and small providers, has continued to develop. We've seen particularly landlords, which I think was mentioned on one of the previous videos, but landlords, particularly from retail, really looking towards this industry as a new growth area for them and an opportunity. We've seen, as an example, I think Industrious paved the way in the US with this, and reports coming out of their business have shown that actually those centres within shopping malls or shopping centres actually saw some of the highest sort of rise or quickest rises to stable occupancy across all their spaces, which I think is a telling sign that there's a lot of pent-up potential demand that hasn't been found or unearthed yet. One of the biggest trends that we've seen emerging, and something that I want to focus a little bit more on, is the sort of the rise of hub and spoke or disaggregated CRE, commercial real estate portfolios. This is something that, while really only relevant for larger corporate companies, is something that I think will not only change the commercial real estate industry, but provide sort of a second wave of growth for flexible workspace. So far, I'd say that 90% of the corporate customers or companies that we're speaking to are exploring the idea. I think exploring is the key word, as I think most companies still don't know where they'll be even in 2 years' time, and there's very little data or information at the moment to help them kind of plan that journey. So it's really a period of kind of trial and error, rather than any sort of wholesale move to one strategy or another. I expect we'll see. That being said, the benefits of this sort of model for the employee and the employer are quite clear. If we look at an example, we've done a couple of models across a number of European cities, companies that are willing to sort of move up to around 40% of their workforce to sort of satellite locations while maintaining quite a large central CBD HQ. Or HQ in a central business district. The savings from a cost perspective are extraordinary. From an employee's perspective, time is the crucial factor. In London, as example, the data showed that the average employee could save about 1.5 hours a day in not having to commute into a centre, which is a huge amount of time, and also save, getting on for £2,000 per person thanks to reduced travel costs. It's worth noting, I think, the dispersed portfolio or hub and spoke model isn't going to work in every location, or not as quickly. Germany and Spain, for instance, where employees live more centrally and it's more distributed, they don't have the long commute times, which means I don't think they're going to be putting the same pressures on their companies to kind of adopt this sort of model. And that's certainly what we're hearing from our teams based in Germany. and other parts of Europe. That being said, we are seeing demand from sort of small to medium companies who are looking at this as a way of reducing cost, moving out of these really high-priced central locations, which they don't have to be in anymore, or they don't feel they need to be in, and instead moving into more suburban sort of locations, which are lower cost and provide them savings. Someone in the company was talking to me about they see a move from the real estate being kind of more of a show feature, and instead focusing it more on the people that are actually within there. And I think that's a good analogy. So far, while there's limited examples of dispersed sort of portfolios actually being adopted, as I say, at the moment, a lot of it feels to be sort of people looking and trying to understand their options. What we are seeing is a decentralization across the commercial real estate industry. After talking to operators providing space both in city centres and suburban markets, the difference in their fortunes is quite clear, and this is being seen right across the European and global markets, particularly in North America. It's a little bit less in Asia because the geographical and cultural perspectives kind of stop some of this type of activity. But in the last quarter, we've seen a greater proportion of demand in suburban locations or rural locations come from sort of mid-sized companies than we've seen in city centres. We've seen a greater proportion of operators report increased requirement sizes in these sort of suburban locations. And finally, nearly a quarter of all providers in suburban locations have reported that they've seen term lengths increase, and this compares to just 5% of operators seeing the same thing in city centres. So wherever you are in the world, the city centres have definitely been hit the hardest. And some of that demand looks to already be appearing to move to the suburban or rural locations. And I think that's coming from, at the moment, small companies, medium companies, not the large corporates, although I think that will follow in the coming year. That being said, we are seeing or starting to see individuals or teams take on space, so going outside of their traditional sort of real estate purchasing strategy or route, and actually kind of going, I guess, rogue and going and doing it themselves because they need the space that allows them to provide or do the job that they're hired to do. So with the needs and the expectations of occupiers changing, our focus over the last 6 months in particular has been on understanding what the occupier is looking at and what they're looking for, so we can support them, not only finding the right space, which is our, one of our primary functions, but also in the quickest time possible. So while we partner with, I think, around 10,000 providers, we need to make sure that we direct our clients to the right people, and that's really important at the moment. For that reason, we've conducted occupier research in 2 ways. Firstly, we went out and asked you, the providers of space, what sort of key demands have been coming from the occupiers. But secondly, we went out and asked a lot of leaders of real estate with companies what their challenges and expectations are. And on this page, you can kind of see some of the results. Firstly, I think it's unsurprising that sort of flexibility in COVID plans appear to be the key requirement or features of workspace. The uncertainty that occupiers face, the fact that health and safety of their staff are absolutely key to getting teams back together and back into the office. And I think despite what maybe we might hear, certainly what we're being told from these large corporates is nearly 100% of the business leaders want, to some extent, get their employees back into an office. So yes, we'll see more working from home, more work near home, but ultimately people still want to get their teams together in the quickest and safest way possible. I think interestingly, it's the points that appear towards the middle of the table that we found interesting. So parking, something that did not really appear on many people's radar just a few short months ago, is now a key factor for many businesses. I don't know how many of you have 1, parking at all, but 2, affordable parking. It's quite often pretty limited in flexible workspaces. Also, ultra-fast internet, something that most of us had thought of as kind of a given. has now been kind of brought to the forefront of people's minds as people have experienced increased problems, working from home with their internets. So it's something that people are being asked for or challenged about a lot now. Lower densities, it is a requirement born of the environment we're in, and it's enforced in certain countries at the moment. But I do wonder, if our mindset about large open plan, densely packed spaces has changed for the good. Sure, we like the buzz and the excitement that those spaces kind of created, but I wonder if the difficult work environment they also created, combined now with the concerns around safety, which I don't think are going to go away, and certainly it's still a primary focus for the occupiers that we're speaking to. That's not going to go away in the near future. So I wonder if lower densities are maybe are here to stay, even if that means the occupier has to pay more for that. When speaking to occupiers, some of the overriding thoughts and focus is around change. About 75% said that change was coming, but they struggled to define what that would look like. And I think from an industry perspective, that means we need to stay flexible and be able to react. Something the traditional side of the sector has been incapable of doing well, and the flexible workspace sector is led up until this point. But I think it needs to stay nimble and stay agile to stay on top of that change. Another big factor was around how the role of this commercial real estate professional and how the value of space would change. A big factor that was discussed was how space is valued, both in the way that we use space, but also how the whole industry values and kind of the value chain works. I think individuals needing dedicated desks are likely to disappear in most businesses, with much more fluid movement and a focus on spaces improving wellness and well-being, not just enabling work. And at the moment, there's no easy way for a business to measure that. I think we've seen indications and increased adoption of occupier-focused prop tech and data, but most of it is not being used to change the way sort of businesses use space in a continuously evolving way. And I think that'll be an adoption that we see change. Being able to measure and show value, therefore, could be a priority, and is something that we're being asked about quite a lot. I wonder how many people, on the call have the ability to say, by taking space here, your employees will be X% more productive, or X% happier, or X% healthier. I probably suspect very few, because we've really struggled to try and give people those metrics. But how powerful would it be, and how would that? I think that conversation would change completely if we could start providing those things. So I think that's something that the occupiers are going to be looking for. So what can you do as providers? And I think it comes in, from my perspective, three main things, but I'm sure there's many more. I think firstly, we need to try and think about the occupier as a consumer, not a business. How easy are the interactions that we have, or I have, with a B2C company or business, whether it's through a booking app or the direct communications, or even the purchasing cycle. It's all focused or should be focused on kind of ease of service and tailoring the interaction. And it's something that we started to see the flexible workspace world do, but I think it needs to continue, and it's something certainly that the occupiers that we speak to are looking for. Another aspect I think will change is the way the occupiers use and access workspace, particularly spaces that is not their own, or not their own dedicated space. Already there's many options available, for people to access touchdown space, whether that's through sort of hotel or airline loyalty apps, or even elite sort of credit cards. Those services are out there, but they're not really used from a real estate perspective as much. And I think bringing this type of solution to business, I think, will be more important than ever. There's a number of apps that are starting to appear on the market, but in my personal opinion, there's still a lot of work to be done. Even providing choice within one space could become more important, as occupiers want to be able to flex or be agile between the different types of space or environments they're in on a day-to-day basis, depending on the needs of the staff on that day. I think that leads me on to the third and final point, which is I think occupiers or providers of space should be thinking about it's been proven that, in most cases, the head down work, and again, it was mentioned on the video, that can be completed at home. So therefore, why are such environments going to be needed in the office to the scale, at least they currently exist? What we're hearing is collaboration, culture, and idea generation are going to be the primary needs for office space. So thinking about how the design of your or layout of your space work from that, taking away those large open plan areas, and again, instead focusing on sort of small breakout spaces that people can use in different ways, and more about, more meeting rooms rather than just sort of seats with spaces for laptops. In short, and just to summarize, I think the industry is in the perfect place to take advantage of huge levels of new demand. The European market has led the flexible workspace world for quite a long time now, although North America and Asia were quickly catching up. Asia as a market has, I think, suffered. We've seen a large number of companies pull out or pull back from that market, and it's something, unfortunately, I think we're going to see over the next sort of 6 to 12 months across both Europe and North America. But that being said, there is expected to be huge amounts of new demand. I think it's a fine balancing act between sort of focusing on the individuals and the companies that they work for. It was mentioned again in the video that, those individuals, those freelancers were the first to leave co-working spaces. And I think they're going to be a very slow area of the industry to come back. So the focus needs to be more on those small to medium and corporate companies for the next wave of growth. Because certainly from what we're hearing, they are crying out for it. They just need to understand more what their options are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James, for your presentation and for sharing with us this interesting information about the flexible office. And now we have received some questions from our audience that I'm going to read to you.
Okay.
Jennifer Brook asks, are you seeking any take-up in local center locations? Clients wanting to work closer to home, perhaps 1 or 2 days a week, rather than working in isolation at home or traveling into city center locations?
Sorry, can you just repeat the first part of the question?
Are you seeking any take-up in local center locations?
Yes, yeah, we definitely are. We're seeing, again, across Europe, a lot stronger performance in sort of, again, we call it suburban or rural locations. The demand actually in many of the satellite towns around the big cities has actually increased during COVID for the first time compared to kind of the city centres. And that's the same, whether we look in London or Manchester or Berlin or Madrid or Paris. It's the same everywhere we look. But the problem is the supply isn't, if it exists, it's not to the same level. So I think that there's a gap at the moment in the market between the type of supply that exists in the city centre that people are used to and what exists in the satellite or surrounding towns, which they're now looking for.
Okay. And then we have another question from Sara Castrillon. It is evident that there is a recovery and even an increase in the demand for co-working after the first big drop in May 2020. However, these positive levels still do not replace the losses of the most critical months. In economic terms, what are the short and medium-term strategies that co-workings have planned to recover the losses of those months?
It's a very hard one to answer. We have seen things like virtual office contracts, and I know many of the providers will offer them, do really well. And that's obviously been a stable, but also another source of income. If you have access to aspects like parking, as I said, those features which traditionally weren't in high demand now are very much in high demand, and companies are willing to pay quite a large amount to have access. So if you're lucky enough to be in that position, I think reading the market and pricing that accordingly could be a good way. But for a lot of providers, I don't think there's a simple answer. I think particularly if there's no government support, it's a very difficult position to be in.
Ok, thank you very much, James. Y bueno, aquí nos despedimos finalmente. Recordaros que mañana es el 5º día de la conference, donde se va a presentar el estudio de la oficina flexible de 2020. Si todavía no os habéis inscrito, estáis a tiempo y no os lo podéis perder. Nos vemos mañana.